war is continued in the Ukraine, it looks more and more likely that we may be witnessing the last event of the Hiroshima-Nagasaki event here in Galway, because there's every possibility we could have a nuclear war on our hands. So it's important to hold this event to mark that fact. Peace and negotiation is the only way forward. And similarly today, it is not arming the Ukrainians and fighting a proxy war. And this is what we're seeing, a US proxy war against Russia, where we're going to fight to the last Ukrainian. It is not the way forward. Peace is the only way forward.
War is futile.
We're here to mark the dropping of nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On the 6th of August, as a consequence of those bombs, 20,000 Japanese soldiers were killed. 126,000 civilians were killed. On the 9th of August, another United States nuclear weapon was dropped on Nagasaki. 150 Japanese soldiers were killed. 80,000 civilians were killed. This was a war against civilians. Before those events, the Americans had launched a campaign. The word they use is a fire bombing campaign. On the 9th of March, Tokyo was bombed. 100,000 civilians were killed. More than were killed in Nagasaki. The United States had carried out this firebombing campaign on 100 Japanese cities. The overwhelming majority of the people that were killed in that war were civilians. That is the consequence of a relatively small bomb in each case. But today, the enormous size of nuclear weapons, if they are used in a nuclear war, either between the United States and its allies against China and vice versa, or a nuclear war on Russia, or Russia's war on us and the whole everybody else, in every case, everybody dies. It isn't just a few 100,000 civilians. Everybody in the world will die as a consequence of another nuclear war, because the weapons are so much bigger, massively bigger, than the kind of weapons that were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, I accept that a day like this, you can't imagine that it would happen. But that's always the case. Before the First World War, nobody thought the First World War would happen. Before the Second World War, people were saying that's not going to happen either. But there is now, in Europe, a war between Russia that is armed with nuclear weapons and NATO that is armed with nuclear weapons. And if this war starts, it will be the end, not just of everybody in Europe, but the clouds of radiation will spread all over the world. It will be an absolutely catastrophic event, and I accept that it's very difficult to imagine that could happen, especially in a day like this. But that is what we are now up against. The actual reality of a nuclear war, because this is the first time there's been a direct conflict that's been going on for months between NATO and Russia. And the Ukraine is just a battlefield. But the amount of types of weapons that are being brought in to that war are constantly escalating. The quality, the type, the viciousness of the actual weapons are just getting bigger and more powerful. And if that process continues, then what I'm saying can and will happen. The only alternative to that is that there is a ceasefire and negotiations, and the sooner the better. And Pana was seeking to make that point before the war even started, that there had to be a process of negotiation. There had to be a process of having a ceasefire in order to achieve that. And yet, for months and months, the entire Irish corporate media were attacking the people in this country that supported negotiations, that supported a ceasefire, that supported Irish neutrality. I don't even know, there might have been one or two of these columnists in these newspapers or on RT or wherever who were saying that. But the overwhelming majority of the entire Irish corporate media attacked people, and they wanted specifically to destroy Irish neutrality, because that's what you need if you want war to carry on forever. You don't want any neutral countries. You want us all to join NATO. You want us all to join a European army, so that we'll all be responsible for a possible nuclear war. They were absolutely shocked, therefore, when a major public opinion poll came out in April that said 24% of the population of this country wanted to join either a European army or NATO. Both of which, by the way, would be armed with nuclear weapons. Because France would be in the European Union army and they already have nuclear weapons. And NATO is just coming down with them. There's an enormous number of nuclear weapons at their hands. 24%, it's a large minority, but it's a minority. Because 66% of Irish people said they continued to support neutrality no matter what the Irish Times said, no matter what the Irish Independent said, no matter what RT says. It's part of our national identity. It's who we are. We don't want war. We want peace. That's why we exist. That's why we're here today. But don't think for 1 minute that the government, whose Taoiseach has said we can join NATO without asking you. We can join NATO without asking the Irish people. We can join NATO because we don't need to have a referendum. That's what he wants. And he said it. He's quite clear about what he wants. Minister Coveney, who is the spokesman for foreign policy representing this state, at his presentation to the Oireachtas on the 30th of June this year, said he wanted to abolish what's called the triple lock. Now what the triple lock says is that no Irish members of the Irish Defence Forces would go abroad and serve abroad without the agreement of Dáil Éireann, the Irish government and the Security Council of the United Nations. That was a concession given to those people because we beat them on the First Nice Treaty, and that was a major step in getting that into law and into the EU treaties. On that meeting on the 30th of June, he made it clear that he intends to destroy the triple lock. He intends to ensure that the United Nations Security Council will have no say over the deployment of an army that is simultaneously expanding and arming. This is the Irish Army with bigger weapons, planes, jet planes, make it into a bigger, serious army. And he wants to make it clear that he's not in favour of the United Nations having any say. So these troops, this army, this larger army, in the middle of a housing crisis, we're spending a massive amount of money on weapons, something we haven't done for a very long time, if ever. The only organisations that do not need a UN mandate to deploy troops is NATO. NATO can deploy troops without any reference to the United Nations. This emerging, it isn't there yet, but they're working on it, the creation of a European army. There is absolutely nothing whatsoever in all the EU treaties that we've had again and again and again. No reference whatsoever to a UN mandate being imposed before those troops were sent abroad. So here we are, facing a possibility of a nuclear war, and the government refused to call for a ceasefire. They refused to call for negotiations. Instead, they are seeking to stop any possibility of Irish troops not taking part in NATO military operations or this emerging EU army operation. This is a very serious time, not just for the Irish people, but for all the way the reactions of this government and governments elsewhere are seeing the solution to a problem by more weapons and the possibility by refusing negotiations of a nuclear war. We are living in a very, very serious time. And it's hard to say that in this case, but it really is serious. Too many times in the past, people don't believe that this can happen. And I hope that's right, I really do. But this time, this day, we have to bring our minds back to what happened in Hiroshima, to what happened in Nagasaki, and do all our power to ensure that there isn't another bigger, nastier nuclear war.
Down in the street too, they call us our boat to leave. Think about the places where some people have to stay. They're drinking from their paper cups, they're sleeping in their paper huts, till the night time turns to day.
Sabina Higgins's letter. I was disappointed and dismayed that your editorial, The Irish Times View on the War in Ukraine, escalating to stand still, commenting on the war in Ukraine, did not encourage any ceasefire negotiations that might lead us towards a peace settlement between the Russians, Ukrainian forces and the separatists. Until the world persuades Vladimir Putin of Russia and President Zelensky of Ukraine to agree to a ceasefire and negotiations, the long haul of terrible war will go on. How can there be any winners? The Ukrainian people have suffered tens of thousands of casualties and are now losing up to 1,000 soldiers a day, killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. Your editorial states that in the war it is estimated that 25,000 to 27,000 Russians have been killed in the fighting. For people grieved by the suffering and longing to hear some mention of peace or negotiations, it was so welcome to read the deeply concerned and thought-out article by the historian Geoffrey Roberts, Professor of History at UCC, saying that now is the time for peace negotiations. Ukraine must grasp peace from jaws of unwinnable war. Opinion analysis, July the 13th. This is surely a moment of moral choice. Concerned people of the world, anxious to live together in peace and sustainability, must demand that this war be brought to an end so that lives are saved. And there is the lessening of the suffering and the reconstruction of lives, and livelihoods can begin. Or the choice to let the conflict go on and the killing go on, with thousands more soldiers, young men and men in their prime dying on the front line, and civilians, including children, threatened with death, fear and destruction of their homes, schools, hospitals and basic services. Continuing the war, of course, makes the climate change crisis worse, which is resulting in millions of people in Africa and elsewhere being put in further danger of starvation and the endangering of the food security of so many in different parts of the world. In our own conflict, 2 centuries we have been commemorating, each time the fighting was ended by a ceasefire being called, followed by negotiation. This was so in the 1906 Rising, the War of Independence, and in our tragic Civil War. The English poet, Clifford Bax, collaborated with the great German composer Gustav Holst to create the great anti-war peace anthem. Turn back, O man, and quit their foolish ways. Their words speak to us across the century and surely are even now more relevant. Turn back, O man, and quit thy foolish ways. Old now is earth, and none may count her days. Yet thou, its child, whose head is crowned with flames, still will not hear thine inner God proclaim. Turn back, O man, and quit thy foolish ways. Earth might be fair, and people glad and wise. Age after age their tragic empire rise, built while they dream, and in that dreaming weep, would they but wake from out the haunted sleep. Earth could be fair, and people glad and wise. Earth shall be fair, and all its people one. Not till that hour shall God's whole earth will be done. Now, even now, once more from earth to sky, peals forth in joy the old undaunted cry. Earth shall be fair, and all its people one. Signed, Sabine Coyne-Higgins, Dublin 8.
Thank you very much, Margaretta.
Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us in prison, circle for release, circle for the planet, circle for each soul, for the children of our children. Keep the circle whole. Circle for each soul, for the children of our children. Keep the circle whole.